All right, let's dive into something huge, an idea that pretty much shapes our entire political debate: government money. We're told constantly that the government is about to go broke, that it needs to act like a family and tighten its belt. But what if that whole idea is just a myth?
I mean, you've heard this 1,000 times, right? It comes from politicians left, right, and center. And on the surface, it sounds so responsible, so sensible. It just makes sense. If you and I can't spend more money than we bring in, why on earth should the government be any different?
Well, what if I told you that powerful idea is just plain wrong? Because that analogy, comparing a government's budget to your household budget, is fundamentally broken. And understanding why it's broken will honestly change how you look at the entire economy.
Okay, so let's get right into it. We're going to start by tearing down this myth. What's the real difference between you and the US government when we're talking about money?
It really boils down to one simple, massive thing: who makes the money? You and I, we're what you'd call currency users. We have to go out and earn dollars before we can spend them. But a government that issues its own currency, like the United States, is a currency issuer. Think about that. It literally spends money into existence. The spending comes first. It doesn't need to get dollars from anyone before it can spend. Here's a great way to think about it: the scoreboard analogy. Picture a basketball game, right? Someone scores a basket. What happens? The scorekeeper just types the new points onto the scoreboard. They don't reach into a bucket of physical points and paste them up there. The points are just created. Well, that's how federal money works. It's just keystrokes in a computer. And taxes, this is the wild part. Taxes don't go into some big government treasure chest. They're like a foul in the game. They just delete points from the scoreboard, pulling money out of the economy. Okay, so if money is just being typed into existence, the big question is, who's at the keyboard? In our economy, it turns out there are two main engines creating money. Let's break down the first one.
So, this is the government's engine. Let's say Congress decides to build a new highway, or it's time to send out Social Security checks. The Treasury just picks up the phone, figuratively, and tells the Federal Reserve, hey, credit the construction company's bank account. And poof, just like that, new digital dollars are created. Economists call this base money. And the key thing to get is that money didn't come from some big pile of taxes we all paid. It was just created right then and there. And look how straightforward this is. There's no big scramble to find the money. Congress says go, the Treasury points the way, and the Fed just types the numbers into a bank account. That's it. It's just accounting.
But wait, the government isn't the only one with a money-creating keyboard, not by a long shot. In fact, most of the money we all use every day is actually created by commercial banks. And here's the kicker: when a bank gives you a loan, it's not lending you someone else's savings. It's creating brand new money out of thin air. Just think about getting a mortgage for a house. The bank doesn't literally go into a vault to see if they have the cash. Nope. They just pull up your account on a computer and type in plus $200,000. Congratulations. That money didn't exist a second ago. Now it does. And of course, you now have a debt you've got to pay back. Okay, at this point, you're probably screaming, wait a minute. If the government can just create money to pay for things, then why in the world do I have to pay taxes? It's the most logical question, and it's maybe the most important one. So yeah, let's really dig into that, because the answer to why taxes is where you start to see the real purpose of our whole economic system. Turns out, taxes aren't for funding the government. They have four other way more important jobs. And these jobs are absolutely critical. First, taxes make the currency valuable. Why do we all want and need US dollars? Because we have to pay our taxes in them. That creates a constant demand. Second, they're the brakes on the economy. If things get too hot and prices are rising too fast, taxes pull money out of the system to cool things down. Third, they're used to steer behavior. Tax cigarettes to discourage smoking, or tax carbon to fight climate change. And fourth, they move money around, redistributing wealth and resources. So think of it like this: spending and taxes are two sides of the same coin. Spending is the gas pedal. It injects money into the economy. Taxes are the brake pedal. They pull money out. By using both, the government can speed things up here, slow things down there, and basically shape who has the money and who doesn't. All right, so what about the national debt? We hear about it all the time. Government bonds, China holding our debt. What's that all about? If the government doesn't need to borrow its own money, why does it sell bonds in the first place? The short answer: because the whole world is lining up to buy them. Seriously.
US Treasury bonds are basically the safest place on earth to park your money. Other countries, huge corporations, big investors, they all want them. You can think of US bonds as the world's piggy bank. And this sets up this incredible feedback loop. Check it out. The US buys tons of stuff from other countries, right? So we send our dollars all over the world. What do those countries do with all those dollars? They turn around and use them to buy US bonds because they're so safe. This constant, massive global demand for our bonds is exactly why the US can run huge deficits without a problem. It's a pretty sweet deal, often called the dollar's exorbitant privilege.
Now, it's really important to get this. This superpower doesn't apply to everyone. Countries like the US, the UK, or Japan, who control their own currency, they have what's called monetary sovereignty. But think about a country like Spain or Greece. They use the euro, but they can't create euros. The European Central Bank does that. So for them, the household budget analogy is actually true. They can run out of money. And other countries are kind of in the middle, with some powers, but also some real limits.
Okay, so this all leads to the final and maybe most important piece of the puzzle. If the US government can't run out of money, does that mean it can just spend and spend forever with no consequences? Absolutely not. There is a limit, but it's not the limit we're always told about.
The myth, the thing we always hear, is that the government will run out of dollars, that the bank account will hit zero. That's not the real constraint. The real limit, the actual speed limit on government spending, is inflation. It's about real stuff. It's about the number of workers we have, the amount of steel and lumber available, the capacity of our factories. You can't just print money to build 10 hospitals if you only have enough doctors and nurses to staff one, right? Too much money chasing too few goods and services, that's what causes inflation. And you can see this all through history. During the Great Depression, the government ran up huge deficits for the New Deal, but there was no inflation. Why? Because there were millions of unemployed people and idle factories. The economy had tons of room to grow. Compare that to World War II. Massive government spending did cause inflation then because all the factories were busy making tanks and planes, not consumer goods. There were real shortages. We saw the same thing recently with COVID. The first round of stimulus didn't cause much inflation. But later, when supply chains were a mess and you couldn't get computer chips or lumber, more government spending pushed up against those real-world limits and prices went up. And that right there is the key takeaway of this whole thing. A government deficit isn't automatically good or bad. It's just a number on a spreadsheet. What matters is the context. What matters is the real economy. Is there slack? Are there people who need jobs and factories sitting idle? Or are we already running at 100% capacity? You know, once you really wrap your head around this, it's a total paradigm shift. Suddenly, when you hear a politician ask, "But how will we pay for it?" the question just starts to sound empty. You realize the real questions aren't financial. The real questions are, do we have the workers? Do we have the materials? And do we have the political will to do it? So let's just end on this thought. If a government, like the US, literally cannot run out of its own money, then the whole debate we've been having is wrong. The question isn't whether we can afford to invest in our future. The real question is, do we have the courage to actually do it?